So welcome everyone to this presentation on synastry in astrology. So this is one of my favorite topics, in fact, of astrology, relationship or synastry, or some people call it compatibility. That word compatibility is kind of falling out of favor nowadays because it's kind of suggesting that, okay, you either are or you aren't, you know. So synastry is a better word in a way because we all have synastry. It could be, you know, somewhere challenging, somewhere more easy, but we all have this synastry without using the word compatible, I suppose. So I'll run through the main points in this of interest and things to consider in chart synastry when we look at any two charts. Now, I'm obviously focusing more on relationship here, but it could be, you know, any kind of relationship. There are elements of it that are, of course, romantic relationships, so it's focusing on that, but you could take elements of it for other relationships as well, like business relationships and so on. So, oh, and by the way, if anyone is not familiar with me, I'm Gary O'Toole, so I run timelineastrology.com. So let's get started. So there are three main things to consider when we look at synastry. And the first one would be each partner's individual karma, their own individual experience of relationship, which is taken separately. So everyone has their stuff, right? You know, everyone has their baggage, everyone has their past life issues and everything in relation to relationship and everything that's not relationship based, but impacts relationship. So that's the whole chart, really. That's your whole karmic blueprint, your birth chart. So that's one part of it that's important to consider, which is not in this presentation, of course. The next thing would be timing. Like, when is it going to likely to happen? You know, I have to look obviously at when the person, where they are in their life, at what stage they're at in their life in terms of their age, but also in terms of planetary cycles, which we mentioned before in a presentation I gave on cycles. And there are specific cycles, of course, in relation to relationship that we can focus in on in this. And then the last one is the synastry, which we'll be looking at now in terms of how you match two charts. There's another consideration that I didn't even consider because it's not even appropriate in this day and age. It's not ethical necessarily, and that is in ancient India, in ancient times, they would look at charts and first of all see the longevity of the both people. Now, so, well, you might say, well, actually that is, you should have a look at that, but that's something I've never looked at. I've studied it somewhat, but I wanted to back off from it as soon as I got too much into it. I don't want to know when someone is likely to, or more likely to pass. But the reason why I'm mentioning it is because in relationships, of course, you want to know that both people have good longevity to stay together in a marriage. So they would match two people who had good longevity. And if someone didn't have that in their chart, then they wouldn't. And so that's obviously going to throw up a lot of ethical questions right there. So that's not included in this consideration. So the first thing is always good to check what lunar day you were born on. So this is quite easy to check if you go to any astrology software. Now they have lots online where you can just, even without astrology software, you can just check the panchanga, or the daily movement of the sun and moon, the relationship between the sun and moon each day. And there's lots of websites you can check that on now. And it's good to know, if you don't have it in your chart, what lunar day you were born on. And of course, there's the waxing and waning phases of the moon. So you see here on the left-hand side, the lunar days, and then the full and new moon. So you can say there's like 15 waxing and 15 waning. So 1 to 14, and then the full moon, and then 1 to 14 waning, and the new moon. So we're coming up to the new moon as I record this. So we're into the 14th day nearly. So whichever day you were born on, then, and these are just the Sanskrit names for them. So 1 and 9 is, Pratipat and Navami. They just, those words just mean the numbers. So 1 and 9, lunar day, are related to the sun. So the planet has a rulership over each lunar day. So 1 and 9, sun, 2 and 10, moon, and so on. So if you don't have it right now, it might be good just to look back on this and see what lunar day you were born on of the 15 bright half or the dark half, and then match up what planet, and then take that planet and look at it in your birth chart. It's always good to have a look at that planet first before you even look at Venus, your 7th house, relationships, or anything like that. Look at the planet that rules the lunar day you were born on, because this has a big say in how you approach relationship also, and that planet in your chart. So if you can, maybe even just jot that down for now, if you know it, if you know the lunar day and now you know the planet. Another piece you could add here is actually the element related to that lunar day. So if you're born on the 7th lunar day, for example, it's the earth element. If you were born on the 13th, it's space or ether, and so on. So that element also has a big say in how you approach relationships. So in a general way, if you were born on 1st, 6th, and 11th, then it's the fire element, and then there's that fiery element brought into relationships, which can be quite passionate, of course, and possibly also create a lot of short-term relationships because of that passion if it's out of control, especially if the planet which rules your lunar day is in a position in the horoscope to suggest such. So that's the fire element. That passion, of course, could be mitigated by other factors in the chart, and so that might be another consideration. And by the way, before I go on as well, there's many things that would be mitigated by others. So this is a mixed bag always in astrology, where you're looking at many different elements, not just one thing. So then if you're born on the 2nd, 7th, or 12th lunar day, the earth element is very steady. And these people tend to want to keep relationships going, and perhaps even sometimes when they shouldn't, but they like to keep relationships really steady and going. 3rd, 8th, and 13th lunar day is the space or ether element, and they hold things together. They like to bind things. That's what the space does. It holds, it contains things. So these people are generally, good at, or want to at least hold relationships together. I'm just getting feedback. Someone on the call is, I'm going to unmute. Yeah, sorry. So the next one then is the 4th, 9th, and 14th lunar day, and it's the water element, which is itself related to the lunar day anyway. So the lunar day is very much about the water element and love and relationship. So if you were born on the 4th, 9th, or 11th, or 14th, you will have the water element very prominent in relationships. And so that might sound good, but actually could create a lot of longing for love, maybe an excessive longing for love, and a need for validation and appreciation, which is all about Venus. So that could be one issue, but certainly loving individual. And then the last 3 lunar days, 5th, 10th, and 15th, they're very transitory ones. 5th, 10th, and 15th lunar day. The 15th would be the new moon or the full moon. And that is the air element. And that can be quite turbulent for love and relationships. Like, think about love as being water and the air whipping it up into a frenzy, perhaps, but also into an unsteady kind of relationship. So where they need more groundedness, they need more stability to function well in a relationship. They need that safety and that containment too. So that's the lunar day. So if you know your lunar day, you'll have a bit more of an idea about your element and perhaps also the planet, and place that in your chart along with Venus and the 7th house as we go through this. The next thing you could look at then is the yoga, or the union. Yoga means union, the combination of the sun and moon. So if you add them together in the degrees, then you come up with this yoga in the chart. And we can call it a relationship yoga in a way, because these yogas, there are 27 of them, corresponding to the 27 lunar days. And it starts from the lunar mansion called Pushya, which is in Cancer. And it's governed by Saturn. So you'll see the list start here from the 1st, and it's the planet Saturn. So the 10th and the 19th are also Saturn's lunar signs. They are Anuradha and Uttara Bhadrapada in Pisces. Anuradha is in Scorpio. So those 3 lunar signs are ruled by Saturn, and the next 3 then are ruled by Mercury, and so on and so on. So if, again, you can check this up online, if you don't have it in your birth chart, you can see what yoga you were born under. And again, there are 27. And the planet which rules that, and place that in your chart too, because it's going to show a lot about how you go about sustaining or containing a relationship, binding you and a partner, or any group or people together. This is a very much a binding element here, the yoga. So that's just another piece of the puzzle, and there are many pieces. So another one to add. And so the most obvious one here is Venus for relationships. And what I call here the 3 stages of relating. So Venus, of course, is a planet of love. It's the primary planet for relationships. So if you study Venus, as well as the 1st and 7th Lord in your chart, so the first, because the 1st is going to look at the 7th, it's right opposite. So the 1st is seen as you, the 7th is the partner, you see here. So both are looked at, 1st and 7th, because they'll both have an impact on the relationship. You have a direct impact, your partner has a direct impact on you. So those 2 planets that rule these 2 signs of your chart would be important. So you have 3 already to look at there, but you could add the other 2 we just looked at, the lunar day, the yoga, and now you have 3 more, and that's 5 already you need to look at. So it's Venus, the 1st Lord, and the 7th Lord in your chart. But even just focusing on Venus for now, which is what I'd like you to do, just focus on Venus and where Venus is in your chart, and its strength and aspects and yogas with it, and where it's positioned and all that. So I can't obviously go into that kind of detail right now, but if you have questions later on, please send them my way, and I can look at Venus in your chart. So according to David Data, now you might not know this David Data, but he's a Tantra teacher, a modern day Tantra teacher. And he has, what I can see, I'm figuring what he's done is he's taking the 3 impulses called tamas, rajas, and sattva that we look at in Vedic philosophy, the 3 intertwining impulses that are within flux and within every moment and everything. And these 3 stages can be very simply defined as inertia, activity, and balance. Tamas, Rajas, Sattva. But he has translated them, as far as I can see, he's using these 3 as calling them stage 1, stage 2, stage 3 in relationships. And so we're going to look at this now, because he calls the stage 1 tamas, in other words, dependent relationships. Now, dependent could be, tamas could be anything from a physical need, so a very physical relationship, for example, if it's a tamas relationship, to perhaps a relationship that's based on finances, that's tamas, to security, perhaps a relationship that's based on fear, manipulation, if it's in its darker aspects, and all of these things. These would be represented more so by the planets Saturn and Mars, as well as the nodes Rahu and KETU, the north node Rahu, south node KETU. The next slide will go through this a bit more in depth. So, but that's the first stage. So you could say that's a lower stage if you want. I don't really like higher and lower, but you know, we have to give them some words. So the lower stage would be stage 1, more dependent, maybe codependent relationship, right? Or it could even, at its lowest, perhaps be, you know, an abusive relationship. But these are the stages, and we all have to experience them in some shape or form. Some people, though, experience one more than the other, quite obviously, and it depends on not just Venus, but other planets like the 7th Lord in the chart and all of that. But start looking at Venus and see where your Venus is in your chart, and you can start to see how this expresses itself. So stage 1, dependent. Stage 2, rajas, would be like, he calls it a 50-50 relationship. This is where people kind of get into a conversation about their relationship. And sometimes, and what he talks about, he says that sometimes they can nullify each other sexually as well, where 2 people become friends, where it's not really, there's not a charge there, there's no abuse there, like stage 1 perhaps, or there's no codependency like in stage 1. But there is this kind of talking things out, and it kind of, what he calls like these kind of friendly relationships. So there perhaps isn't as much passion sometimes there in this 50-50 relationship. So the third stage, then, the highest stage we want to call it, is stage 3. It's the what he calls intimate communion, and this is sattva. This is more balance, and this is where perhaps all stages can be included as well. So in that, you can include more lower, baser instincts like survival and the need to manipulate or whatever, or codependency. You can include that in this. You can include the kind of talking things out and working things out 50-50 stage. And you can go beyond all of those things as well. And you can have this divine connection, this spiritual connection. So another way you can describe these stages, 1, 2, 3, is body, stage 1, mind, stage 2, and soul, stage 3. So is your relationship more stage 1, mind, 2, or 1's body, physical attraction, for example, 2, mind, intellectual, debate, conversation, stage 3, spiritual union, right? So this is how it might look like in the chart. So again, I hope you know where your Venus is. If you don't, this is something you can easily look up. What sign it's in. You have Aries, Taurus, Gemini, and so on all around the chart. And then each one is represented by one of the impulses, Rajas, Tamas, or Sattva. And so they come out as stage 2, stage 1, 3, and so on. So have a look here and see where your Venus is. And see, is it more body, mind, or soul? Is it more stage 1, 2, or 3? Now, you could also add to that, if there are planets with Venus, or looking at Venus, aspecting, in other words, Venus, like planets here, then you could add another element here where, so for example, somebody could have Venus in Aries, stage 2, but it's with Jupiter, for example, and it's stage 3. So that might blend in more of that stage 3 spiritual union. Or somebody might have Venus in Sagittarius, which is more like a stage 3 and an ideal kind of exploration and spiritual longing for love, right? Whereas someone with Venus in Scorpio could be more a physical thing. Or, there could be some need there to overcome some vulnerability in stage 1. So I hope you at least know what sign your Venus is in, so you can work the stage out to begin. And that's just another piece of the puzzle you could add in understanding the dynamics between you and your partner and what the needs are. So getting into synastry. So the first thing to note is that there are seen as the 4 main pillars of chart matching. Before we get into the more specific kind of Indian astrology approach to matching one's moons, there are 4 pillars, including the moon, as well as Venus, the ascendant, and the sun. So those are the 4 kind of main things you would look at for synastry. Not that you wouldn't look at other things, but those are the 4 main: moon, Venus, ascendant, and sun. So the moon is your feelings, and of course that's the most important thing. It's all about relationship. So the moon is used more than anything. Venus, of course, because Venus is about relationship and it's about desire. So it's about what we desire, who we desire. The ascendant is about how we approach our life and also our physical space, our intellect. So that would very much show if 2 people work well together in each other's space, for example. And then the sun signs are essence, really. So that is a deeper essence, perhaps not obvious from the outset, but this sense of when you're with somebody, you kind of get that sense of, do you gel well together on that level? So you'd have to match all 4 and see how do they match up. And so there aren't really any relationships that would have really bad matches between all 4, because those 2 people would just butt heads and wouldn't get on anyway. So they're not going to get into a relationship necessarily, unless it's an inimical relationship, it's a difficult relationship. But what you have is mostly a mixed bag where things aren't gelling completely, because actually the other side of that is if 2 people match so well on all the 4 corners that it's just so easy. It's almost like there's no grit to hold them together. There's nothing to work out, right? So it might actually be better to have a bit of, mismatch going on, because there's something gluing you together, but there's something also keeping things smooth and moist, and things can move nicely. So what primary and secondary links between these represent are, if somebody's moon is matched well with another person's moon, that's primary, right? If somebody's Venus matches well with another person's Venus, that's primary. Ascendant to ascendant, sun to sun, that's primary link. It's really good to have good primary links. Secondary links is kind of like, okay, somebody's moon is matched well with the other person's Venus, or somebody's sun is matched well with the other person's ascendant. So Venus and the moon match well, or Venus and ascendant, or whatever it is, that's secondary link. And that will also be a good indication. And a lot of people can have primary and also secondary. So there's a lot of links going on. So how they link up then is based on and categorized in all these kinds of relationships. So there are helpful and unhelpful relationships. The helpful ones are, in particular, the 5-9. So these are the trinal relationships. And I'll show you this, how this looks like, what this looks like in a chart. 5 and 9 are the same element. And so this is all based on elements, by the way. So this is how another reason why to think about elements in relationships. So the most helpful is the 5-9. The next helpful is the 3-11. The 5-9 is particularly helpful. The 3-11 is less so, but still very helpful, more friendly, perhaps. And then there are unhelpful relationships between planets, and we all have them. 6-8. It's kind of like a boxing stance. You kind of, it's not 1-7 where, or 1-1 or 7-7, where you're kind of in each other's space or opposite each other. This is like you've turned slightly to the side where you're shielding your, front, like a boxer would stand with another boxer. So boxers don't stand head on so they can get hit. They turn slightly. So this 6-8 is that kind of fight, sort of inimical, really difficult relationship. So this is the most unhelpful, the 6-8. The next unhelpful or less unhelpful is the 2-12, because they're standing sort of behind each other. And so they kind of, this thing's operating in the background and unbeknownst to each other, perhaps some hidden stuff going on. So if you have relationship or planets in relationship like this with another person, you can't really see what's going on, perhaps. Whereas with the 6-8, you really see it. You really feel it. It's like, it's angsty. It's quite inimical. And then this depends. If you have planets in the same sign, 1-1, then it depends on the planets themselves, of course. Are they friendly to each other, or unfriendly planets to each other, and so on. This also depends, 7-7. So when they're opposite, are they friendly or are they unfriendly to each other? Because that will show, even though it's an opposition, sometimes oppositions are like passionate oppositions and friendly trysts, if you want to put it that way. But sometimes they're very unfriendly oppositions. And then lastly, then is a very contrasted situation where you have the 4-10, the angle, which is just showing there's quite a, it's perhaps not as openly conflicted as the 6-8, but it's quite contrasted, like the difference between day and night, where you really don't have a sense of the other person in respect to that planet, at least. So that's a 4-10 relationship. So here's an example, and we can put it into practice now, in terms of how they match up. And so the charts I've chosen are pretty, obvious in a way, because they're probably one of the most famous couples in terms of people we know in celebrity, and that's Elizabeth Taylor and Richard Burton. So there's a long story to tell about their marriage. Of course, their marriage twice, actually, because they were married twice. But let's see how they match up in terms of the 4 corners, for example, just again to show you as an example. So if we take, first of all, the moon, you can see this is on the left, Elizabeth Taylor's chart. She has Scorpio ascendant, moon is in Libra in the 12th. So moon in Libra, and this on the right is Richard Burton, Pisces ascendant, and moon in Leo. So how do they match up? Well, you count from, and this is one of the things that's done always in Indian astrology traditionally, you would always start from the woman. And of course, in our modern day and age, we have to be more considerate now of not just male-female relationships. We have to think about perhaps more masculine and feminine, and not always just male-female. But traditionally in India, you would start with the woman and then count to the man. And it was always seen as the woman needs to be pleased first in the relationship for the marriage life to be happy. But again, you can use feminine partner, more masculine partner, if you want to put it that way. So if we count from her moon, Elizabeth Taylor's, to Richard Burton, you always count inclusively from your planet, from whatever you're looking at. So here would be Libra. Let me bring up a highlighter. So not a highlighter, what do you call it? Laser. Okay, so moon is here. So that's 1. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. He's got the moon. You can imagine the moon here in the 11th. And then you count back, counting again inclusively, 1, 2, 3. So this is the 311 I mentioned earlier. So this is helpful between their moons. Okay. Now, if we go to their Venus, she has an exalted Venus. I'll talk more about her Venus, and it's with Rahu. So there's complications there, of course. And she had a very complicated life in relationships. But she has an exalted Venus and a high ideal, a very strong Venus here. And his Venus is in Sagittarius. So we're going to count from hers to his, which is here. So you go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And then back again, 1, 2, 3, 4. So it's a 4, 10. And remember, that's contrasted. So their Venuses were contrasted. And so they might not have got each other in that department so much. And, you know, if you read biographies, you know, of Elizabeth Taylor and Richard Burton, you and their history together, you know, it was quite conflicted, you know, but there was something pulling them together, and I'll show you what that was in a while. So that's Venus. Then you have the ascendants, which are very friendly. And this is why physically they're in their space. They work together quite a bit, actually, once I think it was Cleopatra that they met on set. And they worked in a few films together, I think. And you can see here, she's got Scorpio rising, and you count from hers to his, which is Pisces, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Same element, Scorpio, Pisces, water element. Count it back again, and it's 9. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. 5, 9 is the best relationship to have between planets or ascendants. So they got on well together in their physical space. And then the last thing is the sun. And you can see here, she has the sun in Aquarius, and he has the sun in Libra. So again, best relationship. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Back again, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So 5, 9 again. So the sun and Venus, or sun and ascendant, particularly strong, really friendly, very gelled well together. Moon, very friendly as well. What wasn't gelling so well was their Venuses, which you might think, well, actually that needed to be the most gelling because it's, you know, it's Venus, but also because in Elizabeth Taylor's case, it's her 7th lord. Her Scorpio ascendant shows Venus ruling her 7th house. So it just didn't gel well in terms of, you know, their relationship, unfortunately. And they tried twice. So they got married twice, and it didn't work out either time. So that's just a brief look at how you would look at the cornerstones. And then they're all primary links, as I mentioned. And then you can look at secondary links, like, for example, moon to sun in this case. Her moon is in Libra. His sun is in Libra. There's a big link, secondary link, therefore, between his sun and her moon, for example. Another one would be her Venus and his ascendant in the same sign, Pisces. That's how you would look at this. And you can do that with all the planets, of course, but those are the primary and the secondary links in their chart. Okay, so I'm going to move on. That's just a brief example first. We'll look more at their charts. So the first thing you can do, again, looking at your own chart, is to see, you know, what lunar day you were born on, as I mentioned. And in her case, Elizabeth Taylor, she was born on the 6th lunar day called Shashti, 6th. And that is ruled by Venus itself, right? And, you know, we see that in her chart. If I go back, Venus, the 7th lord already. So Venus is already the 7th lord, a really important planet. It's also the lunar day lord, so a doubly important planet, and it's exalted in Pisces. So Venus became the most prominent thing in her chart in terms of relationships being so prominent. And they were, I mean, I think she was more famous for her marriages in a way than her work as an actor. So But it was very conflicted because Venus not only was exalted, but was with the node Rahu, the eclipse. So there was a very conflicted situation going on there. Rahu, Venus. I'll explain more about that later. So that's, and also if you want to then look at the element that was activated, another reason why she had so many relationships, you could say, is that she was born on the 6th lunar day, which is a fire element. And fire is probably the most likely to have short-term relationships and very passionate relationships that don't last as long. So that's Elizabeth Taylor, lunar day. And then her yoga, she was born under the 12th yoga, Dhruva, which is ruled by KETU. KETU in her chart, let's go back to her chart. Sorry for hopping around here. KETU here is in Virgo. And Virgo, or KETU, doesn't really act alone because it can't. It's an eclipse. It's just a disembodied being. It's a shadow. So it has to act through the planet, which rules the sign it's in this case, in Virgo and Mercury. And Mercury is in quite a challenged place in Aquarius, in the 4th sign, just because it's in the 4th, but also because it rules the 8th sign of conflict and obstruction here in her chart in particular. So this would have brought up some blocks. 8th sign also represents blocks in terms of her ability to keep things together, which is what KETU was meant to do. So if we go forward again, because she was born on this 12th yoga with the sun and moon, the combination between the sun and moon was the 12th and its association with KETU. So this is maybe another reason why it was challenging for her to kind of gel things together always. Because I think she was married, I have it here, about 8 times. She had 7 different husbands, but she was married 8 times because she married Richard Burton twice. So anyway, we can go through that again. So next we can look at our blessings in the chart, which are very much seen in terms of the divisional chart, the 9th divisional chart, or the D9. And this is examined for blessings that we have in general in life, but especially in relation to spouse, because the spouse is one of the greatest blessings. To have a great spouse is a great blessing in life. So the D9 and the birth chart, the main birth chart, are compared and contrasted in the individual and as well between 2 individuals. But the D9 is also used for sexuality. So in the D9, or Navamsha as it's called, Nava means 9, Amsha division, Navamsha 9th division, where we look specifically at the 3rd, 7th, and 11th houses in this chart. These are the Kama. You might have heard of the Kama Sutra. These are the Kama houses, the desire-filled houses. 3rd is the 7th and 11th are all full of desire. So planets in these places in this 9th divisional chart will show your sexuality, your preferences. So that can show you a lot about your preferences and your partner's preferences. The 1st house in this divisional chart overall shows your attitude towards relationships in general. So here again are Elizabeth Taylor and Richard Burton. And this now is their Navamsha or 9th divisional chart in both their cases. On the left, again, we have Elizabeth Taylor, and on the right, we have Richard Burton. So again, the 1st sign would show attitude towards relationships. And so with Elizabeth Taylor, she had Cancer rising with Jupiter. Now, in one way, that is a blessing, but it's also a challenge because, as you may know, Jupiter is debilitated in Capricorn. So, you know, this kind of can feel sometimes like a hopeless situation. And, you know, if you read about her experiences in relationship, in particular, I think it was Mike Todd, I think, who died in an accident, which was quite tragic. And she was obviously heartbroken on that. That was a very traumatic experience for her. She had a lot of difficulty in relationship. And so this Jupiter in this sign, you know, although it's retrograde and there might be some cancellation and all of that, and she did have a lot of husbands, you could say, in that sense as well. That was a key important part of her life, was to be in a relationship. But it's a challenge situation also. In Richard Burton's case, on this side, you can see Virgo and the moon rising. So there's a lot more of a, you know, a if I can use the word or phrase, Jack the Lad here, because he was described as that when he met Elizabeth. He had a reputation already that preceded him in terms of being a ladies' man, we could put it that way. And that's no insult to him. That is just the way he was. That was his nature. Now, if you look at the both of their D9s, so, and again, you can look at the 3rd, the 7th, and the 11th. So in her case, Pisces, Cancer, Scorpio, to see sexuality. And so Saturn in there in the 3rd is going to show maybe a different kind of sexuality. Saturn and Mercury in any of these 3 houses would show kind of different sexuality, a different way of doing things. In Burton's case, 3rd has 3 planets, Mercury, Mars, Jupiter. 7th doesn't have any, and the 11th has Venus. This is a very passionate person, for sure, with Richard Burton. I'm not saying Elizabeth Taylor wasn't. She clearly was if you look at her main chart, but really this chart in Burton's case is showing a lot of passion. Mars, Jupiter in the 3rd, Mercury, Venus in the 11th. Very passionate nature. So another way you can work with these two is to actually see the links, and you might be able to notice it already. So the first is you in the D9. When you look at your D9, this is you and your approach to a relationship. The 7th shows your sexuality. So remember, it's her sexuality. You can add the 3rd and 11th, but let's say her sexuality is the 7th. And in his case, the 1st is him, and the 7th is sexuality in his relationship. You'll notice the correlation in both of their charts. He has, Elizabeth Taylor has Jupiter in the 1st, and the moon, Cancer, rules the moon, or moon rules Cancer, I should say, in the 7th. And he has the moon in the 1st. And he has Pisces, which is ruled by Jupiter, in the 7th, where she has it in the 1st. So you can see this link between the two of them in this chart. And you normally see this between 2 partners, significant partners. So this is a strong link between the two. There are other links I'll go through again. But this is another way you can start looking at your chart. So sometimes then there are blocks in a partnership, of course, and that can happen, you know, 2 people getting together or who have been together for some time. And of course, Rahu, Saturn, and Mars would be particularly influential in blocking. Rahu and Saturn block things in general, but Mars tends to block things, tends to create arguments and so on. And so if these are influencing Venus or the 7th house or its ruler in your chart, for example, this might create some blocks. There's always a possible block or perhaps more of a delay in getting married if the 7th lord in your chart is retrograde. And I've seen this so many times reading charts that when the person's 7th house lord is retrograde, they get married later in life. That's quite common. Another block could be what is called Kuja dosha. Kuja is another name for Mars. Dosha, fault. You might have heard that from Ayurveda. It's this fault of Mars, and this is so common, so we kind of have to almost just take it with a pinch of salt. And there's also a remedy for it, and the best remedy for it is if you have it, that your partner also has it, because it nullifies it. So it's like a double negative. So if you have Mars in the 1st, 2nd, 4th, 7th, 8th, or 12th, that's half the houses, by the way. So that's half the time people have it. And if you don't have it from your ascendant, but you have it from your moon, you still have it. Or if you have it from Venus, you have it to a degree. So you're likely to have this. Mars in the 1st, 2nd, 4th, 7th, 8th, or 12th from ascendant, moon, or Venus. And again, if both people have it, then it kind of cancels each other out. Another concept we can use, and this is going a bit further into more in-depth astrology, is the Upapada. Upa means closest to. Upapada or is another ascendant or lagna. Upapada lagna. And it's usually written in a chart as UL, right? And this is really important for marriage, this here. And we can look at that in their charts in the example I'm giving. And another one to look at is the Dharapada. And so where the D7 or the Aruda, the word is Aruda. It and one translation of the word Aruda is attainment. So it's something we attain. And so if it's a partner, the D7 would show partners. But more specifically, the UL, which could be written as D12, the Aruda or attainment of the 12th, of giving, of getting into a serious relationship, is also written as UL. This is more important for long-term partnerships. The D7 is more important for short-term, maybe short-term relationships. Also business relationships. We look at in a chart. And then there's another thing to look at, and that is the planet with the lowest, and I know there's a lot to look at, but all of these things have to be taken into account when you're looking at all your relationships overall. The planet with the lowest degree, regardless of the sign, is the Dara Karaka, and it's usually written as DK. So when the planet, whatever planet has the lowest degree, regardless of sign, this represents your spouse. So one of the things, and I always advise this for people who are having difficulty in relationship or maybe difficulty finding a partner, is to fast. So I call this fast love. So fasting on the day which is ruled by the planet ruling the UL in your chart is advised for attracting and for keeping a partner. So depending on where the UL is in your chart, and most astrology softwares will give it to you. You can even work it out online. If you don't know where that is, I can work it out for you. Please, you can contact me. Happy to take an email and to work that out for you. So wherever the UL is in your chart, though, whatever sign it's in, the planet that is ruler of that sign, you can see the signs here and the ruling planet, fast on that day. So the days of the week are Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, in that order. Sun's day, Moon's day, Mardi, Mercredi, Jeudi, Vendredi, Samedi. That's the best way to remember them. Sun, Moon, Mars, Mercury, Jupiter, Venus, Saturn. So wherever your UL is in your chart, fasting on that day, and ideally the whole day, sunrise to sunrise. So if it was, say, UL is in Leo, you would, and actually in the case of Elizabeth Taylor, it is in Leo. So in her case, I would have advised her to fast on Sundays, from sunrise Sunday to sunrise Monday. Now, what that does is a few things. First of all, you give to the planet, to appease the planet that is in charge of bringing you a partner and keeping a partner. But also by fasting, you continuously give and give of yourself freely, because a partnership is not about taking, it's about giving. And when you get into a space of giving and you're more able to give, you're more able to keep a partner. Because as soon as you stop giving to your partner and they stop giving to you, it's beginning of the end. So this fast, this remedy, this is the best remedy to do for this particular situation, is to fast for your partner, to give freely. And also the last thing and most telling thing is, if you cannot do the fast, it's telling you that you're not ready to give. If you're wanting to meet somebody, but you haven't met somebody, and then you're told to do a fast and you can't do it, or you don't want to do it, it might be telling you that you're actually just not ready to give. The only cases where I wouldn't advise it, if someone had an eating disorder, because obviously you don't want to create any sort of situation there and make things worse. In that case, instead of giving up food, you could have a silent day, if that were possible, and to give something up on that day. And to think of that day as like a ritual on that day that you're giving of yourself and giving something up. Another option is you could do a half fast or a partial fast, or a type of diet where you're just giving up something you normally eat, or you're just having a cleanse day or a juice day, where you're not actually maybe eating, or you just eat one meal like they would do with lots of religious festivals. So that's another option. And it might be even better to do it that way wholeheartedly than do a full fast begrudgingly. So think about it that way. But I would highly recommend it. And that's also for people who are already in a relationship and who want to help the relationship get, smoothed out if there were any difficulty at any current time. But it certainly is also helpful for attracting a partner as well. So as I mentioned, I'll show her chart now again. Elizabeth Taylor has the UL in Leo. I won't work this out for you because I might confuse you, but the Aruda the attainment is shown in the chart as a separate ascendant. So in her case, the partner here, the first partner in particular, would be seen here, the UL in Leo. But that's just the first one. And this is, I wanted to just highlight how the elements show how we experience each subsequent relationship, because she was married 7 8 times, but she had 7 different husbands because she married Richard Burton twice. So if I just go through her chart, you'll start to see a pattern. So from any sign, so in her case, the first relationship would have come to her from Leo, right? And no matter what relationship she was on, whether it was the first, second, or third, I would have still recommended the fast on Sunday because you go back to the original one, the UL, right? But the first one here, UL, is in Leo. The eighth sign from any sign shows the end of that thing. So whenever you're reading anything in a chart, you're going to look at the eighth from anything to show the ending of it. So when you count 8 from Leo, you're going to arrive in Pisces. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So you've gone from fire, a relationship that was experienced for her as fire, to a relationship, the second, which was more watery. And then you count the same again to see the end of that relationship and the next one, and you end up in Libra, which is air. So she had a more maybe intellectual. I haven't read too much about her individual relationships, but I've done enough of this readings for people, and they have, you know, voiced to me that this was indeed their experience of these separate relationships, one after the other, that there was a more predominant fire than water, and then air, and so on. It doesn't necessarily start with you with fire, wherever the UL is. Of course, it could be starting with water, then it goes to air, then earth. So in her case, the first was fire, second was water, third was air, fourth was earth, and they're all the elements. So by the time she got to her fifth relationship, which was actually when she married Richard Burton, she was back in fire again. She reignited the fire in her relationship. And so Sagittarius is how she experienced the relationship. Now his ascendant was Pisces, of course, because, you know, you could look at it a different way, but Sagittarius is also ruled by Jupiter. But in either case, and now after Richard Burton, then I'll show you, that's interesting in her chart, she married him again, and I'll show you why that may be. But then you go through different elements again. She goes back to water, and then air, and then earth, and so on. So it's changing through the elements all the time. You're having a different experience of relationship, each serious relationship. So this is her chart. You see here the UL in Leo. This is the first partner. Second partner here in Pisces. Rahu Venus would be there. Third partner here in Libra with the moon. Fourth in Taurus. And then fifth, Richard Burton, you could say here, Sagittarius. And then sixth here, back here in Cancer, but you have Jupiter, the ruler of Sagittarius. She married Richard Burton twice. So this was the first time she married him, and the second time she married him, you can see here that there's a link because Jupiter, the ruler of Sagittarius, is here. So that's just an interesting correlation. So here are, again, their two charts. On the left, again, Elizabeth Taylor. On the right, Richard Burton. Elizabeth with her Scorpio ascendant, Richard with his Pisces ascendant. Now, there's another link here with Rahu KETU and karmic relationships, you could call them. And with Rahu KETU, there's always something, even with, despite red flags, we sort of get into relationships where we kind of know, or we get a sense of, you know, we've been here, done that before with someone, you know, I've known that person my whole life, or whatever it might be. So in her case, again, the first one would be here in Leo, and the second one more so here with Rahu. And that would show some big karmic link with her second husband. And I think that was Michael Wilding. Yeah, that was her second husband. So there wasn't necessarily a big karmic link. Well, we can look at the subsequent relationships, but with Richard Burton, it's more obvious. With Elizabeth Taylor, all of her relationships, you could say, had that kind of karmic feel about them because her ruling seventh ruler is with Rahu. Venus rules the seventh sign with Rahu. So she had this kind of very karmic experience, and out of her control kind of experience is what that means when you have the nodes. Things happening outside of her control, as in many cases they were. So there's a very karmic experience. With Richard Burton, his first relationship would have been seen more from Gemini. And the second sign from the UL shows the sustenance of that relationship or not. And with Rahu in the second from the UL, that can show a shocking end for his first relationship, which was indeed, because he met. If you go to the 8th from here, you'll see his next relationship, and you'll see KETU. And remember, Elizabeth Taylor is Scorpio rising, which is ruled by KETU. So this is his second relationship, and he met Elizabeth Taylor, and it obviously ended this relationship quite abruptly and not so nicely, I guess. And then he met Elizabeth Taylor, and then as soon as you get locked into the nodes, it's like it's very hard to get out. I've been told once when reading a chart, and I don't agree with this entirely, but I've been told when you're counting through the chart for relationships and you come across the nodes, stop counting. That isn't what I've seen to be the case, because, and in this case, of course, Richard Burton went on to marry on how many other occasions? 2 other marriages after Elizabeth. He married her twice, but he had 2 other marriages after her. So you do go on to have other relationships, of course. It's just that always kind of has that pull. And I think they always said that about each other, that they always had that kind of connection, you know, right up until they died. So you can see with Rahu Ketu is this kind of what I call karmic relationships that kind of pull into somebody. So then timing. How do you time this? Well, there's a lot of ways to time, because as you can see already, there's a lot of things to consider. So there's a lot of things you could time it with. And that means also a lot of possibility for timing relationship, which is a good thing, because we all want to be in a relationship and there are lots of possibilities. So one of the things you can do is you use cycles, and I've done a presentation before on this, planetary cycles, and I particularly look at the 7th Lord. One thing that's very relevant for partners is called Dasha Sama, which is the same cycle. Sama just means same, Dasha is cycle. So where you're in the same cycle, the same space and life experience, and you're going to have the same experiences, and that kind of pulls you together as well. Another very relevant one is called Sati Sati, which a lot of people know about, which is when Saturn transits the person's moon. Now, if we go back to their charts, let me go back to their charts. You'll see here that their moons are not that far away. And in this case, that's quite challenging in a way because of Sati Sati, because of Saturn transiting the moon, because as soon as he started it, Saturn starts when it transits the sign before your moon, the sign of your moon, and the sign after your moon. 7.5 years, which is what Sati Sati literally means. That can be challenging for relationships somewhat, especially if it's a 7th Lord, or the moon is the 7th Lord, or Saturn is the 7th Lord, whatever it may be. And even when it's not, it can be challenging emotionally for the person, which affects their relationship, especially when it's transiting the moon. So when he started it, of course, he got affected straight away. But as soon as he started finishing it, you'll see that she started it. As soon as it went into Virgo, Saturn went into Virgo for Richard Burton, it started the cycle for Elizabeth Taylor. And it's the sign before the moon in particular which triggers something in a person where they feel like they need to kind of break away, or there's a need to destabilize in a way. Especially this is seen as the first cycle is seen as affecting intimate relationships more so. So as soon as he finished this cycle, she began this period, and then afterwards the most intense of it, and then finishing it. So when you have your moon very close to your partner, in other words, that Saturn transit I mentioned is going to impact your relationship. So this Sati Sati, 7.5, Saturn over your moon. Apart from that, there are cycles, again, these planetary cycles we talk about in Indian astrology, that have a big impact on relationships and are seen as quite like turning points in a relationship, and that they are Saturn Venus or Venus Saturn, as well as Rahu Venus or Venus Rahu. These would be quite, in a way they'd be a challenge for you, because, for example, and in Elizabeth Taylor's chart, for example, she had Venus and Rahu together. So when you're going through a cycle of Venus and Rahu, it's like having a conjunction of Venus and Rahu, and it creates an excessive amount of sexuality and need for relationship, and an excessive amount of relationships in Elizabeth Taylor's cases. So that's not necessarily good for keeping people together, Rahu Venus or Venus Rahu. There's a kind of dissatisfaction going on where they want to maybe look outside the relationship for that satisfaction, unless they're more aware of this impulse, and and, know that that's the impulse and kind of dampen it down, or just know that this is passing anyway and they don't need to maybe go there. Because I've certainly seen that, and even in my own life, I've seen that when I went through my own Rahu Venus cycle. I knew that was the case, and I kind of just didn't heed that impulse as much, because I was more interested in staying with my partner. So I kind of, even though there was this need, a strong need with Venus Rahu, I kind of channeled it in other ways, shall we put it that way, in more healthy ways than having relationships outside of my relationship. So those are key periods to look for: Saturn Venus or Rahu Venus. So timing then can also be done with cycles of Venus, of course. That's very obvious. In Elizabeth Taylor's case, it'd be more obvious because it rules her seventh sign. So that's another thing. You can look at cycles of your seventh lord, or planets aspecting or in your seventh house. That could bring a marriage too. The seventh from Venus, of course, can bring a marriage. It's cycle and transit. As I mentioned, the Darakaraka, the planet with the lowest degree in your chart, cycle of that, or transits to that. The UL in your chart, it being activated by a cycle again or transit. There's a lot of possibilities for a relationship. And then you can add another one, fifth house. If that's been activated by a cycle or a transit, the fifth house is when we start relationships, when we get into the sort of more romantic phase of a relationship before we kind of get into the contract, the marriage itself. The fifth house is all about romance. So these are Elizabeth Taylor's and Richard Burton's timelines, counting from their moon. So on the left again, you have Elizabeth Taylor. On the right, you have Richard Burton. So you'll see that let's just look at actually when they met and they got married. So they were married in, I've written it here somewhere, 1950. I'm not sure if that's right now. 59, I think. I'm gonna have to check that up again, but I think it was actually 64. I don't know why I wrote 59 there. Okay, so anyway, I think it was 64. But I remember calculating it before, and it was definitely like Rahu for him. So this on the right hand side, you can see the Rahu cycle coming in, and this is where more so probably that broke his first relationship, his marriage to his first wife, Sybil Williams. So that's kind of like the end of that first one, and that's his experience there. And then in that case, then in 64, you can see she had begun her Mercury cycle, and Mercury in her chart, it's not the easiest planet for Scorpio. It rules the 8th house. So in a way, you can see that she's had many breakups because she's had many relationships. So that would have been, a breakup as well at that time. So you can see the correlation here. 1963, she begins Mercury. 1963, he's Rahu. So you can see this kind of definitely something transformative going on for both of them. If you were to read their chart and didn't know who they were, you'd know that about them. But I'm almost sure it was 64. I'd written 64 down for Richard Burton marrying Elizabeth Taylor. So I think that's the same, for some reason I wrote it down earlier for Elizabeth Taylor, 1959. And then they got remarried, of course, in 1975. So 1975, you can see Richard Burton was in Rahu Venus. And in 1975 for Elizabeth Taylor, it was Mercury Jupiter. Jupiter would be a good planet for her to get into relationship again, because it's the 5th lord again. It activates that 5th lord. Venus, for obvious reasons, for Burton. So there are many ways you can time it using this, but that's not the only thing you would use, of course. So another aspect of relationship is Ayurveda and healthy relationships, we put it that way. Now, there's different opinions about this. I have my own, I guess, but it is just an opinion. But later on, when I show you the moon, there is a very definite calculation based on the moon. Ayurveda and relationships, when you have these mind-body types, the air types, fire and water types, Vata, Pitta, Kapha, there's one argument that says if two Vata people, airy types, are together, they don't understand each other. And indeed, that is the case. But what happens is they can like really imbalance each other too. This is not so relevant in terms of relationship as it is offspring, because when you have two types of the same, then the offspring will have those imbalances. And this is what Ayurveda looks at: is Vata, Pitta, and Kapha are doshas. They're called doshas or faults. So we're all born with innate faults, and when our parents, and of course we get them from our parents, they're genetic. So when we look at later on, when we're matching each person's moon, they need to be in this different category. They must be in a different category to be a match. If they're in the same, it's not a good situation. However, in general, without referring to people's moon signs, in general, when you have types, you can see that Vata types, air types understand each other, fire types, water types understand each other. But again, air types will like whip each other into a kind of frenzy and excitability and very ungroundedness, maybe. Pitta types may argue more, or at least be competitive with each other. They're the fire types. And Kapha types might be more kind of stay at home and sort of get stuck in a rut, because their tendency is to stagnate with water. That's their tendency. What I've found is that mixed types are good, because if you have, for example, a air fire type matched with a fire water type, that's quite a good match, because they have fire in common, but the air of one person balances the water of the other person. It's like the adaptability of air gets them moving out of that stagnancy, whereas the water of that one person can balance the air of the other, where it grounds them, where they feel like that bit of stagnancy is not bad for an air type because they're always moving. So that's kind of a mixed type, which would be good. So for example, Vata Kapha type matched with a Pitta type, that Pitta type will get the Vata, the air and water moving, or not moving, but sorry, more fired up. Fire types can fire somebody up with passion. Air, water types can lack a bit of passion and drive. And so the fire types will bring that to them. So you can see how mixed types can work well. But if you have pure air type matched with another air type, there could be quite a lot of imbalances in their lifestyle. Same with fire or pure water. So that's Ayurveda. So now we're getting to the last section of this presentation. And this is all based on the moon now. This is not in terms of what I just mentioned there about Ayurveda, the physical body and all of that. This is more about moon and temperament and psychology and mental outlook and how you feel. I mean, let's face it, how you feel in a relationship is more important than anything. How do you feel with that person? There's a 36-point system called KETU points that we use traditionally in Indian astrology. It's kind of not, it is still used today, but it's lost some of its sheen because of some of the classifications, in particular, the first one, classification for sure. But also the way that they match men and women traditionally, and it's falling out of favor because of that. Not just because there are different types of relationship these days, but also because it was just, the woman was always taken first, and then you look to the man from there. And there was a very good reason for doing that, but it's seen as old hat now. And that's doesn't mean we should throw it out, because it works really well, this system. But you just need to adjust it to suit. So for same-sex relationships, for example, or even in a man-woman relationship, where you just kind of make allowances. So you'll see as I go through this anyway, there are 8 different categories that you match your moons with that are given points. And each one has a point, a different set of points. So the first one has 1 point, the second one 2, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh, and eighth have those corresponding points. If you add up all these, 1, 2, 3, and 4, and 5, and 6, and 7, and 8, you get 36, basically. So you can see that the Ayurveda of the moon's matching gets the most. You get 8 points if you have the different dosha to your partner, according to the moon sign now. And you don't get any points if you have the same. I will go through this now, you'll see one by one. So the first one is classification. And again, this is why this might be controversial in this day and age, because of this caste system. Don't take this literally is the first thing I would say. Okay, just take it symbolically, or just as some sort of classification for understanding one of your your moon. Okay, we're talking about moon here now. So this relates to spiritual development, it says. But you could also call it an ego development or any kind of classification or any development. Again, it's not, that you're literally a priest or you're a warrior or you're a merchant or you're a laborer. It's like there's just classifications for each of the signs. So 1 point is awarded when and it's only 1 point, by the way, so it's not a lot, so it's, if you don't have it, it's no big deal. 1 point is awarded when the couple share the same moon classification. Simple as that. If you have your moon in the same signs in this classification, the water signs, the fire signs, the earth signs, and the air signs, you get a point. Or if now this is where it can be controversial, of course, or if I'm translating this differently because it would always say, or if the man's moon is higher than the woman's. So, okay, I can hear some gasps already without any sound coming from the other end. So if the man's moon is higher in classification than the woman's, then there's a point, but not the other way around. So that is very controversial, of course. I'm trying to reword this so that it doesn't sound so bad. So if I say, if the masculine partner's moon is higher than the other one, it still doesn't sound good. Or in a sign whose lord is of a higher classification. So there are planets that are seen as classified. So, and this, again, this higher or lower classification is coming in. So obviously this Brahma caste, priestly caste, Jupiter, Venus, and then you have the warrior caste, Sun and Mars, the merchant caste, Moon and Mercury, and the laborer is Saturn. So that's what's most controversial about this. So I'm going to quickly step over it because I really feel like this is not ideal. And anyway, it's just 1 point. The second one is mutual attraction. So it's quite, again, feminine, masculine I'm putting here, but it would always be female partner, male partner. So 2 points are allocated with the following match. If the female partner has the moon in any of those signs and the masculine partner has the moon in any of those signs, there's an attraction, a mutual attraction. So for example, if the female partner had the moon in Aries and the male or masculine partner had the moon in Leo or Scorpio, there's a mutual attraction. You get 2 points. It's only 2 points. Then you get 3 points for this one in your daily activities. It shows if both partners feel comfortable in your daily activities together. You count inclusively always from one to the other, both ways. You want to see it from both. This is where it gets a bit more easy to handle. You want to see it from both ways, from the man to the woman and the woman to the man, from the masculine to the feminine and the feminine to the masculine, whichever way. And you divide by 9. And if you end up with the remainder being 3, 5, or 7, you don't get any points. Now, you would have heard me talk about these as the lunar signs I mentioned here. 1 to 27 lunar signs, these are the names. These are the degrees in the zodiac. In my other presentation on this, I talked about these, and that the 3rd, 5th, and 7th stars in this sequence are more challenging. So when you match any 2 people and you end up with this 3, 5, or 7, it's not seen as an auspicious thing. So for example, if somebody had their moon in Purvashada, shall we say, and the other in Mula, you go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. So you'd count 13, and then 9 into 13 be once, and then you're left with 4. So it's fine. There's no 3, 5, or 7. But if it was the sign before, then you'd end up with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. 9 into 12 leaves 3. So that's not a good match between Punarvasu and Jeshta, for example. So you don't get a point then. You get 3 points if it goes good both ways. If it's only one way, then you get 1.5 points. So not a big deal, really. The fourth one, and you get 4 points for this matching of animals and this animal magnetism. Each lunar sign, again, I've listed them here, are classified as either male or female. Again, perhaps I should have written here masculine or feminine, but anyway, in this classification, it's a male or female animal. So we can keep male, female. The animals are here, so you can see the horse is the male Ashwini horse, female Shatabishak. The elephant, female Bharani, or male Bharani, female Revati. Now, If you match well here, of course, one has a male and one has a female, that's even better. But I'm not taking all of that into account in the next table. What I am showing you here is that there are certain matches that are not good at all. They're animal adversaries, as they're known. And so the horse and buffalo, if you match those two, it's not great. But it means that you can work in it, of course, but it just means that this part of your relationship, the animal magnetism, the sexuality between the two of you might be at an odds. It's kind of something you're not really gelling well in. Elephant and lion don't match well. Sheep and monkey, serpent and mongoose, dog and deer, cat and rat, obviously, cow and tiger. So if you find where your moon sign is and where your partner's moon sign is, do they match up or not in this case? And the next slide, you'll be able to see how they exactly match up. So this is the table where you look at one partner one way and the other partner the other way, whichever, it doesn't matter, male, female. So you found maybe that you're a cat, and then you look down and your partner is a buffalo, and you see how many points between a cat and a buffalo. It's 2 out of 4. There's a possible 4 here. The maximum, of course, would be when it's the same animal. You get 4 out of 4 points. You don't get any points when it's an adversary. So a buffalo and a horse, 0 points. So you can easily match this, and you might want to do that in your own time if you can't spot it right now. The fifth one, and you get 5 points for this, is mutual affection. 5 points when both moons for both partners are in the same sign. That's quite obvious. So there's a mutual affection, they understand each other, or at least they're friendly toward each other, the planets, in other words. And there's a table here showing friendly planets and enemies and neutral planets. 4 points when one is friendly to the other's neutrality. So your moon is in the sun sign, for example, and the sun the moon in Leo, for example, so it's the sun, and the other's in a Mercury sign, which is neutral. So that there's a neutrality going on there. So you can match them that way. 4 points if one is friendly, but the other is neutral. 3 points when both are neutral. So if they're both neutral, like in certain cases that you can see, there's a neutrality. And then 1 point when one is friendly and the other is inimical. So they're enemies as well. So the sun and Saturn are enemies. Moon isn't actually any enemies. Mars and Mercury and the moon, Jupiter and Mercury, Venus, sun and moon, Saturn, sun, moon, Mars. So they're enemies to those. And then only half a point when one is neutral and the other is inimical, and you 0 points when both are enemies. So you can have a look at that table in your own time and figure out your moon and your partner's moon, and are the planets friendly or neutral? So when you're reading it, you're looking at this planet, and this Mercury is neutral to the sun. Moon, all are neutral to the moon. Mars, Venus, and Saturn neutral, and so on. Mars, Mercury is an enemy. Moon, no enemies. Sun, Saturn, Venus are an enemy. So you can read it that way. Okay, next one, we're nearly at the end here, is temperament. And you get 6 points for this, so it's an important one. If you and your partner have the moon in the same group, you get a maximum of 6 points. If one partner has their moon in the first column and the other partner has it in the second column, you get 5 points. If one has the moon in the first column and the other in the third, you get 1 point. So in other words, you have a demonic classification, a human, and a divine. Again, this could be controversial, but we can also call them tamas, rajas, sattva, stage 1, 2, 3. That's another way of doing it. And when you have a higher stage, a more third stage, divine stage, governing over the lower stages, it's seen as good. So that's why you get maximum points. If you or higher points if you have, so it's saying if you have them in the same group, you understand each other, first of all. That's 6 points, right? You're both in this demonic group. That's good because you're in the same grouping. You understand each other, same temperament. But if one has a lower one and the other person has a higher one, that's good. So one partner has the moon in the first column, third stage, for example, and the other has it in the second column. That's a good case of divine and human. or then the third one was divine and demonic. The divine sorts kind of balances out the demonic. But what you won't get a point for is if one person is human and the other demonic, because human is not enough to take the demonic out of the demonic, basically. So that's how that's read. The next one is psychology. You get 7 points for this, so it's an important one, and it's a bit more complex to work out, and you won't work it out here necessarily. I just wanted to simplify it for you. It shows how each feels, not just within the relationship, but within a larger context in the family. A maximum of 7 points is allocated when the, again, masculine, it would normally say male partner's moon, is conjunct or in the 7th, 9th, 10th, 11th, or 12th from the female or feminine partner's moon. So you count from, again, inclusively, from the masculine to the feminine, and if they're together, or if it's 7, 9, 10, 11, or 12 away from the feminine moon, that's a good match. All other ones, not such a good match, although there is a cancellation here if both moons are ruled by the same planet. Because that can happen, because say Mercury rules 2 signs, Gemini and Virgo, for example, and so on. Also, if your rulers are friendly or neutral, this has a tendency of cancelling out the inauspiciousness. So there's always going to be a cancelling factor with this one. It's a bit more complicated to work out. I won't dwell on it, but this is one way you can work out if you get the whole 7 points. Are your moons together? Or counting from the masculine to the feminine, is it 7, 9, 10, 11, 12 away from the feminine partner? Finally, then, the last one is health. And this is related more to not just the health of the two people, it's more so in relation to health of the offspring. So if you have a different dosha to your partner, you get maximum 8 points. If you don't have, while you have the same dosha, you get no points. So in other words, it's best to be, normally you want to have the similarities going on in most other cases of all these pointing systems, but this is the one where you want to be different for sure. Again, Vata, Pitta, Kapha, air, fire, water types. You want to have a different one, different classification based on your moon sign to your partner to have that kind of diversity. And so when that diversity comes together in offspring, it's healthy offspring. When you have the same Vata, 2 Vata moons together, it creates more Vata problems, or Pitta or Kapha. So again, looking at Elizabeth Taylor and Richard Burton's chart, they only score 20 out of 36. Now, it's not that bad because that's, you can see average if you took that as halfway almost, or just over 36 points. But it's recommended to have over 20 and as much over 20 as possible, really. And that's not really, it's just about average. There are obviously a lot of other things I mentioned in their charts, pulling them together and karmically and so on. And there are a lot of other things that are very helpful in their charts. But matching their moons, it's just about average and it's just about there. So it may be enough to get them into a relationship, because if you have a really low score, you probably wouldn't even get into a relationship with someone. You wouldn't feel right with them. So in this case, it's just about average, and it was probably very challenging for them because of that, because of the other indications as well. But with 2 other charts that had only 20, that could be a good situation because it's still average. And if there are other things compensating for their moons, remember, this is just the moon. This is only calculated from each person's moon. And this 20 points I've worked out is just based on their moon, nothing else. So their Venuses, suns, ascendants all compensate for this. I wanted to show you one last slide and how and when a relationship works really well together. And unfortunately, Elizabeth Taylor and Richard Burton are not a good example for that, even though they tried very hard. But these 2 are. And this is Joanne Woodward and Paul Newman. And they are seen as the most steady relationship in Hollywood. They had the longest marriage. I think they were married 50-something years. And look at the score. Based just on their moon, 30 out of 36. Now, when you look at their charts, you can see they both have Sagittarius ascendant. So that's a plus point already. They both understand each other really well. They have an affinity for each other, because not only are their ascendants the same, their second, third, all these houses are the same. So they really understand each other. and in each other's space, they work really well together. You see their Venuses are 311 from each other, very friendly. That's nice. The moon also in the same sign, but thankfully they're not in the same lunar mansion, because in Joanne Woodward's chart, it's in Dhanishta, and in Paul Newman's chart, it's in Shatabishak, the next lunar sign. So they actually got 8 points from that. And they built points up because they have the moon in the same sign, Aquarius, different lunar sign. So that's great. Just getting a... Okay. So that's ascendant, moons, Venus are all good. Sun then are not as good because you can see they're in a 2-12 relationship. One is here and the other's here. So that's 1, 2, and then counting around again, you get 12. So there's something hidden there, but it's Sun. It's just one indication out of many things that are really positive. And like I said, they were married for 50 years or more, and that worked out really well. So there's a lot of, and you look at other things. Saturn is in a 3-11 relationship. You can look at their Jupiter isn't so great. It's 6-8. So there are some at odds perhaps there around their ethics and morals and values, maybe, or maybe in terms of what they believed, for example. But everything else seemed to be really well matched. There is a conflict there with the Mars and with their energy, because Mars is in a 4-10 relationship in their chart. So there may have been something there with how they spent their energy and their passions. But of course, you're never going to get two charts perfectly matched. And that's, like I said, actually that's not even something you want, because there has to be enough grit for something to be worked out with the person. And yet you still have to have enough synastry and ease for it to be enjoyable. So that's it, folks. Thank you for spending the time in my presentation here. I just wanted to thank you for joining me. And again, to remind you, if you're not already a patron, to think about becoming a patron. And I post in-depth daily astrology for my patrons. They know this. And monthly forecasts and presentations that you can avail of just by becoming a member, $5 a month. So have a think about that. It's timelineastrology.com or the Patreon page /timelineastrology. One last thing before I leave this presentation is I wanted to just mention that I have an app coming out, which I'm very pleased about. And it's all based on the moon signs. And I'll keep going on about the lunar mansions or moon signs, the 27 lunar mansions. And so this is a way for you to use an app where you'll be able to actually track the moon every day. So you can actually see where your moon is by just opening up the app and see where the moon is that day, and also where your moon is in your chart. Calculate that, as well as your sun sign, and then also calculate your timelines that I keep referring to in these planetary cycles. And there's also a matching compatibility analysis in it, but it's only based on the animal magnetism. There was a couple of others I was thinking of putting in, but I may do later on. But at the moment, it's not in there. You just have, the. Let me just mute somebody who's just arrived. No. Okay, so basically, in other words, it's a really good app, a simple app for you to put in your birth details, to know where your moon is and a partner's moon is, to match them up somewhat. Again, I'll have more on that later on. And then to track the moon every day for your activity. So it's just saying here, a Timeline Astrology app will not only help you understand yourself and others better, it will guide you in your activities based on the mood each day of the month. So where the moon is every day dictates the mood for the day. So Rohini, the moon is in Rohini today, which is it's very conducive to love and harmony and relationship. And so I chose this day to present this, for example. But this app will also show you how your life is unfolding over longer periods of time with these cycles, and understanding where you're at in these cycles. It's a very easy app to use. So have a look. It's on the App Store, I think. It's only on the Google App Store. It's not on the Apple App Store as yet. There's a bit of issues with it, you know, of course, with Mercury retrograde at the moment, but it should be up there soon. And so again, you can download it for free. So have a look. Okay, thanks everyone for joining me, and I'm going to stop the presentation, and until next time.